In this video, we will be covering working with sample sources from the user perspective in FreezerPro. Note that the user role in this system is the lowest ranked role that permits a user to work with sample sources. Sample sources help define and explain where a sample in the system came from. This tutorial will take place primarily in the main navigational panel on the left-hand side of the user interface and in the main view window. To begin, expand the Samples, Groups, and Sources section. Next, expand the All Sample Sources tab. Under this tab, you will see all of the available sample source types your administrator has created for use in the system. You may open a list view of all of the sample sources in your system by double-clicking on the All Sample Sources tab, or you may open a list view of all of the sample sources of a specific sample source type by double-clicking on that sample source type tab. In the list view, you may add, delete, and edit sample sources. Additionally, you may generate a report of all of the sample sources as well as import sample sources from a CSV file. First, we will add a new sample source. The name of the sample source is required and can be entered into the name text box. Next, you may add any additional information such as a description and any information for the user-defined fields. Note that your sample source type may not have been created with any user-defined fields. This is a configuration setting designated by your system administrator or manager. Once you have entered the necessary information, you may add the sample source by selecting the Add button. In the list view, you may see the number of samples that are currently tied to each sample source, as well as some other information about the sample source, such as its name, type, and ID. It may be necessary to edit a sample source's information at some point. To do so, we may use the Properties tool. To edit a sample source's information, select it in the list view and select the Properties tool in the toolbar. The Edit window will appear, in which you may change any of the source's information. Once you have done so, you may finalize your changes by selecting the Change button. If it becomes necessary to delete a sample source, simply select it in the view and select the Delete tool in the toolbar. Keep in mind that sample sources must not be in use by other samples if it is to be deleted. A quick way to create multiple sample sources is by performing an import. Imports can be achieved using CSV files, which can be created in Excel or any other text editing program. To begin a sample source import, first select the Import tool in the toolbar. The first option, Strict Import, requires that all of the user-defined fields in the CSV file must be defined for the sample source type in order for the import to be successful. If this box goes unchecked, the system will ignore any user-defined fields and associated information that are not defined for the sample source type. Next, you must choose the sample source type for what sample source you are importing. Note that you can only import sample sources of a single type at a time. Next, you must choose the CSV file in your system. Once you have done so, you may perform the import by selecting the Import button. For examples of proper CSV files, please see the knowledge base at ruro.com. The last tool in the Sample Sources view is for generating a report of your sample sources. To generate a report, simply select the Report tool in the toolbar. You will be given an option for the format of the report, either HTML, text, PDF, or CSV. Once you have selected your report format, you may generate the report by selecting the OK button. After the report has been generated, you may download it by selecting the Here hyperlink. This concludes the user working with sample sources video tutorial. Up next, we will discuss managing sample alerts. To review, sample sources help define and explain where a sample in the system came from. Sample sources can be created, deleted, modified, and imported in the All Sample Sources section. Sample sources can be defined for each sample source type in the system, and there is no limit to the number of sample sources that you may have defined in your system.